Good morning, everybody. Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, dear friends. My name is Andreea Chină. I'm a project expert for ESPON EGTC. And I'm very proud to be the host of this nice session this morning, where we are going to present one of the latest ESPON products, which is aiming to provide a new interpretation of the productive city, including fresh research and a new awareness of the role of the public sector in this field. For this, I am really happy to host such a distinguished audience and guests presenting the policymaker and the stakeholder perspective, Mr. Michael Rosenberger, Senior Expert in Strategy Development, Vienna City, Mr. Martin Ambo, Unit Leader, Agency for Planning and Building Services, representing Oslo City, presenting the project results, ESPON researchers, Mrs. Valeria Federi, professor in Politecnico di Milano, excuse my Italian, who will also be the moderator of this session. Mr. Peter Huber, senior economist, Austrian Institute of Economic Research, also from Vienna, and Mr. Adrian Vickery-Hill, joining us remotely, researcher, designer, and planner for Osmos Network. We are happy to have also Mr. Alexander Vandel, Associate Professor, Delft University of Technology, who was kind enough to accept our invitation to join our debate. So without any delay, I am passing the floor to Mr. Michael Rosenberger to open the session.
So, does this work? No, it doesn't. Yes, good morning. Glad to see you here. As Andrea introduced me, I was more or less the person who got this research idea started, because at the time I was working on an industrial strategy for the Vienna region, Vienna area, and a lot of questions kind of were not answerable. We just didn't have evidence or data or knowledge enough to really do a kind of spatial master plan for industrial land in Vienna, and therefore I reached out to various cities in the Eurocities network, and also partners I knew from other networks, and I found quite a big interest of other colleagues in this topic, and so we decided to aim for a ESPON-funded project, and that's how it all started. It was a topic that seemed relevant to many people, and therefore we got the opportunity to do this research, and you will hear the results from it from my colleagues after me. I'll just try to present more or less the problem. Why did we ask for this research capacity? So basically, what we found or find in Vienna still is that the work that we see in cities is kind of constantly changing and evolving, and so the spatial dimension of it, the spaces, the sites that are available or have to be available for the economy to work and for economic activities kind of have to change with the change of work, and this is something that more or less happens from alone. Work moves away, work stops to exist. Types of work just no longer are relevant. Like here, I think this is supposed to be an old textile factory, no more. And yesterday I saw a former steelworks here in Lille, also converted to other uses. So this more or less happens all the time, that industrial space and land is converted to something else, something like this. Other workspaces sometimes, or most of the time in Vienna, it turns into office, into residential space, into nice apartment buildings and apartment blocks. As we are a growing city, we are happy as a city authority to see, okay, well, there is new land in good locations becoming available, so let's make dwelling units out of it. and we are a rather fast-growing city, so we have added 8 to 10,000 flats per year over the last 15 years, and therefore we've gradually kind of started to use up the industrial land, the rail yards, the sorting yards, the shipyards, everything that is kind of used to be productive spaces is, changing and becoming something else, and it looks nice, and there are trees, and there are happy people and families, but we are kind of losing our economic space, places where you can work. And this is something that has really becoming frightening to see this rapid change. And that's when we started to discuss this more openly with colleagues from the Chamber of Commerce, from the business sector, also, of course, in the city administration. And we had to make this kind of fundamental decision: should we just let the market forces do the job and transform the land, risking that eventually there will be close to no industrial or no commercial land in the closer vicinity of the city, and everything will be converted? Or do we stop that kind of through regulations and through other means that we have, and do we prepare for a future of work and physical work and productive work also in the city? Do we reserve land for such purposes? Anyway, we discussed this a lot in Vienna, and we came up with this strategy, with the plan that has zones and reserves land for future purposes that we sometimes don't even know, but we seem quite sure that there is such a future of work in cities and also productive and physical work in cities, and that land should be reserved. So basically this is where we come from. We used the MISTA project expertise and the research capacity, but also the knowledge from other cities, and see, do you have the same phenomenon? Are you worried about this? And do you see a way, if we want to intervene and if we want to do something about this, what are maybe models or cases where we can just not only stop the conversion in the fashion that we don't want, but can we also do something to create kind of a new type of work in cities that is future-proof? And there are many arguments to keep also productive uses and work in cities. I won't go through them right now because of that would take too long, but we have just found that productive work is a big pillar of the economy, although only maybe 10 or 9 or 12% of people really do physical work, but all the work that is related to it, from research to service jobs that are only there because of this productive work, taken together, it's quite a significant part of the labor that happens in city. And also that is kind of my final thought that I want to bring here into this discussion, that it's a question of kind of resilience. I mean, resilience is a word close to becoming meaningless, but we just cannot expect, or at least I'm convinced of that, we cannot expect that we as rich cities in Europe, in Austria, can just more or less have everything delivered to our doorstep from some faraway place. We don't know where it comes from. It goes across the whole world, and then it's just kind of dropped off by Amazon or somebody else, and the waste we create is just somehow disappears through some magic trick. I think this is just a model that we have made to perfection in the last maybe 40 or so years, that with global sourcing and offshoring and all these concepts. And I'm not convinced that this is possible to rely on such a system. We've seen it in the COVID crisis, of course, that suddenly things were no longer available, even simple things, that we don't have the capacity to make things anymore. We don't store things anymore. We have no local materials anymore for the pharmaceutical industry, the chemical industry, etc. So yes, this is, and also people want industries is maybe a bad word. I don't really have a good concept of it, but it's also smaller things. It's manufacturing. It's local, small scale, productive work. It's not always a big factory like this. But if you need a plumber, if you need somebody to service your new fancy photovoltaic system on your roof, you need somebody to come and take care of this and store it and install it and maintain it. And all this becomes more and more kind of a challenge to house functions like this. So basically, we have now started quite a discussion in Vienna about the circular economy. So this is kind of the next thing that's coming up after decarbonizing everything and creating local energy and local basically well, not create energy. You can't create energy, but energy sources, local independent energy sources that need space, that need to be housed somewhere and maintained. We also now have a strong discussion about the material part of the world. How can you do this in a circular loop? How can you refurbish, reuse, and all these R words? How can you make the world more sustainable? And also this needs space, and this needs to go somewhere. So all in all, our conclusion in Vienna was there are very many good reasons to take care of our industrial land, to not let it be converted to fancy housing and offices, but to be a city that is also able in the long run to do its kind of physical work, physical job, and that we need strategies to do this. And so, yeah, the MISTA project tries to be part of the answer, give ideas from all over Europe and even outside, how others are approaching this, and also provide data and evidence why what I was just telling kind of from a public servant perspective. I'm a city planner, I'm not an expert in economics, but is this story that I was telling you, is this relevant, is this true? And if yes, what should be done about it? So I'm hoping we will have interesting presentations and insights from other colleagues, and I'm of course happy to answer any questions in the following part of the session. Thank you.
Good morning also from my side. I would just like to thank Michael Rosenberg for this introduction, which was very interesting, and to start presenting a bit the general framework of this handbook that you probably have found in the main hall, maybe yesterday. I don't know if even today there were some copies distributed. So if you are interested, of course, we are happy to distribute it. So the idea of today is to give you an overview of the book, so inviting you to read this book and also to go through the entire research, which of course is on the ESPON website. And in particular, I would like to introduce the structure of the book and its main arguments. And then I will pass the word to my colleagues that will go more in deep in some parts. and I will be in particular presenting the part related to policy advice. So to move the slide, just click on green. Yes, okay. Perfect. We are here, and this is the cover of the book, and you can finally have it in front of you. The title is, it tries to be challenging, making ground, reassembling the productive city. So the book basically re-elaborates the results of our work of 1 year and a half. At the end of the day, we were completely stuck and by the pandemic because we were due to have a general seminar on March 2020. So you can imagine how the project was a bit hit by the pandemic. Nevertheless, we worked together for 1 year. And I think the book represents the way we worked, looking at the problem as it was presented by Michael and trying to learn from other experiences and to generate some policy advice for policymakers and our project stakeholders. Basically, the book is divided in 4 parts, and also the presentation today will give you some hints on the 4 main contents of this book. As Michael Rosenberger has anticipated, we try to support during this project our stakeholders and many other cities, and in particular metropolitan areas all over Europe. This was our target, to try to understand how to deal with a very big dilemma as it was presented in the words of Michael. Being productive or not productive. This is probably one of the biggest dilemmas of cities and metropolitan areas today. Should we accept the idea that the productive cities should leave our metropolitan areas and cities, or should we think about a new space, a new relationship between the urban and the productive city? So this is really a huge dilemma, and it's not just a dilemma of few cities, but as you probably know, also the Leipzig Charter introduces this idea of the productive city as one of the pillars of the future of the cities in European Union and in the European continent, I would also say. And so we try to connect the project to these new keywords of the European Union urban agenda, let's say, and asking ourselves, what does it mean to be a productive city today? At the same time, we try to understand what's the role of research, and in particular the kind of research that is funded by ESPON, and we try to define a space of action for research. On the one hand, questioning the 2 keywords, the city and the productive dimension, and on the other side, trying to produce ideas that could be really feeding the policy makers' agenda and everyday action. As you have heard from Michael Rosenberg, we had very passionate and active stakeholder cities that were trying to feed the debate with some key and open questions. What does it mean to be competitive today as a city? Should we accept the high competition between different uses, land uses? So should we expel the productive city, or should we reintroduce the productive dimension in cities? Does it, produces conflict towards the quality of living in a city and being a citizen today, as we were thinking in the past when we decided to expel the productive dimension from the city? This is one big issue, managing this competition between uses. And another big issue is how to be resilient. As it was said, the Oslo case in particular, probably also our colleague later will introduce some words about that. If a city wants to be resilient, it has to be able to move in different direction and feed the everyday life of citizens, also from the productive dimension. And so how to reintegrate the manufacturing and the productivity dimension into the set of economic functions that is normally hosted by a city. And there are among our stakeholders, there are cities which have a very strong industrial past. Turin, Stuttgart, cities that have been definitely funded around the car sector, the automotive sector, and that are now trying to understand what to do with the past, but also what future for this sector. So we had hard cities where industry and productivity were central pillars that are now completely rethinking their background and also looking at the future. And finally, maybe I would also just add the fact that if you will follow this presentation, you will have some different ingredients of how we work. On the one hand, and you will hear in a while, some in-depth analysis, trying to use better the data or dig into the data in a different way in order to understand how the manufacturing sector has been changing. So also look into sectors which are not necessarily looked at as ingredients of the productivity dimension. On the other side, trying to also look at a bit to fluxes that indicate maybe a new relationship between the industrial, the productive, and the other functions. And then, of course, big question was how metropolitan areas can play a role, and which role the public sector can play at this scale in order to address, if not fix, these big questions. And I will be, at the end, trying to give you some elements of our final part, the final part of the handbook that is more related to policy advice. So taking some interesting cases in mind, inspirational cases, that's how we define them. We try to condensate to generate some policy advice that could be useful for other cities in Europe. So this is a very preliminary, let's say, index of today's workshop. And now I think I can give the floor to our colleague from the Oslo city, Hans Martin Ambo, if I spell it well, more or less, sorry about that, that will bring to the table another case and other elements for this reflection. And I pass him the word. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello,
so,
good morning.
I'm very happy to have been invited to talk to you and to present the case for the Oslo situation. When we got contacted from Michael about this project, it was already something that we've been working on and looking at for some time, and we were really enthusiastic about finding out more about sort of the industrial or the productive activities that happens in our cities and how we as planners can work to address them. So first, my name is Hans Martin Ambo. I work in the Agency for Planning and Building Services in Oslo, the municipality of Oslo, in the department that works with the urban planning. And I'm at the moment a unit leader for the section that works with comprehensive planning and regional planning. But at the time that the MISTA was ongoing, I was a project leader for our comprehensive plan. So when we're talking about, if you can change the next slide, please. Could you change the slides? Yeah, thank you. So when we're talking about this in Oslo, we're looking at these type of areas. You can see to the right, the main road. It's E6. It's one of the European main roads. In the end, you can further back, you can see the freight terminal. It's the national hub for logistics in Norway. And then you have this land coming towards us, which is industrial type land. Some is for some of this is for waste disposal. Some is an old factory, some is just storage connected to logistics centers, etc. And what is happening is that what you don't see on the picture, but the buildings closest to this view has already been demolished, and the new city is being built there. We are in this sort of a French condition of the city where the growth of the city is gradually taking over this type of land. It's a big transformational way of developing the city. It takes effort, and it's at the same time as it's needed for us in order to supply the housing that we need in our city, and the market forces is sort of working together. It's also spreading out these are already functional areas, and these areas are spread out. So if you move to the next slide, please. So one of the reasons why we're concerned about this is because of the activities that happens in these kind of areas is actually covering a huge part of Oslo's workforce. It's about 20% that is in the group that we can call production or logistics related business. That also includes wholesale, but it does not include retail. And of that 20%, we can see that both construction business and wholesale are the two largest subgroups, and they are actually as large as the health sector or as the education sectors. So they're quite big sectors. But also the rest of the production and logistics related business comprises of about a third of the overall part, and are also a substantial part of our workforce. So what is happening when this transformation is going on? If you could take the next, please. So we're also seeing that part of this is an industry in decline, especially process industry, and some other industrial activities are declining quite a lot. And some are maybe declining in the number of workforce based on effectivization related things. But we also see that some of this, like construction, is growing rapidly, and it's almost growing as much as high-tech or scientific activities, or as in Norway, a huge sector is also connected to oil and gas, which has a huge growth. If you can take the next, please. So we're seeing that there's a huge, the main challenge is that we have a population growth. We have to somehow adhere to that, but there's limited space. And what does that do, and how can we work to both address the growth and the limited space? So if you could take the next, please. So the Oslo and the region has a strong growth in inhabitants, about 35% increase from, these are old numbers from before the pandemic. The reason why I'm not showing the latest numbers is because the pandemic has actually changed this picture in some way. But we're not yet sure if that is a temporary blip in the growth, or is that is a long-lasting trend. So that's, of course, another type of things we need to understand, but the growth is still there in our city. And if you can take next, please. And our city is basically has quite limited land. The municipality is covered by 2/3 of a forested area, which is protected under national law. And the development zone is actually mostly already developed, so there are no new space to develop in. And what happens is that because of this shape, and if you take next, please. And because of the forested areas and the fjord, the city is actually growing out into corridors, and the municipality border is not sort of doesn't have any sort of functional border in how the city is growing. So we need to understand better how we can facilitate the growth and also how we can facilitate these type of productional activities. Are there any of these that are related to the terminal and should stay closer to the terminal? Are there any of these activities that are directly related to providing services to the city center and needs to be close to the city centers? And are there some of these activities that are actually better off further out from the city center? So how can we work with this, and how can we also find productive and activities that can be reintegrated into the urban fabric? So if you take the next, please. So we have a regional plan that sets out the growth in Oslo, and it's based on a strong city center in Oslo and regional towns further out, and then a functional urban area that stretches in between these areas. And in that plan, we also set up some regional logistics and industrial areas that are mostly a bit out from the Oslo city center and also from the regional towns. But we also have, as you can see on the right illustration, there's Alnabru, which is the main logistic terminal, which is the closest to the city center. But these regional areas are mostly there to facilitate the larger scale industrial activities. So our question, of course, is what about everything else? What about the whole picture of industrial activities, production activities, material services, etc., that also Mike will talk about, that we might need to support our city in the future, and that also provides a lot of these job opportunities that we have in the city right now, but and it makes quite a big set of our workforce. And how should we work with this? So that sets out quite a few questions that we had approaching this MISTA project. If you could take next, please. We needed to understand where the location patterns and dependencies between businesses and which kind of productive activities that needs to be strengthened or protected, or that we should look into and finding strategies for. And we need to understand better how to deal with the small scale production, the light industry workshops, and also all types of services that is provided locally to the city, which is not covered in that much detail by the regional plan, but also has regional aspects to it, especially with our own municipal borders so close to the city center and our functional areas growing so much further out from our municipality alone. And we need to find strategies and inspiration and knowledge about which production activities to address and how we might tackle them. So we believe that the MISTA project has delivered this in a good way, and we have been lately trying to work further on from this research. We are in the process of revising our comprehensive plan, and MISTA is a key part of the material that we use to identify and develop strategies for these production activities and also physical services. And we are working on looking at more detailed on production activities in the city, which one is sort of has the strongest possibility of working and thriving in the city in the future, which do we need in the future, which one which type of production should Oslo be focusing on further on. And we're also looking at getting a better understanding of city logistics, which is not only about the use of the areas, but also about finding a way of distributing goods across the city in a green and environmentally friendly way, and reducing carbon emission as well. So MISTA has been a solid work to base all of this further work on. And if you can just take the next, please. I'm really looking forward to following this further, and we're very happy to be part of this project. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hans Martin. It was really an interesting contribution, and I think it clarifies some of the elements that we will discuss during this morning. And I will immediately give the floor to my colleague, Peter Huber, Austrian Vienna Institute of Economic Studies, and he will address this big question, why should we take care of the productive city? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me just see whether this technology works.
There's the big button. You go ahead. No, this one.
This one. Okay.
Go ahead, and then next to it, you go behind.
Okay, wonderful. So my role is quite simple. In this presentation, basically, I will be talking about the development of production in urban areas in Europe, basically addressing two central questions. The first one, why even care about production in the city? The second one is a rundown of the development of manufacturing and production in the city. Since the time slot allocated to the presentation is relatively short relative to the size of the report, I thought I would tell you what I'm going to say right up front and then go into the details. So basically what I'll be saying is there are good reasons to care about production in metro regions, even pre-COVID. These come from the fact of the innovation base that the production provides. It comes from the productivity growth. It comes from the export base it provides also for services. There's a transport function for services. And it's also important from a European perspective. I will also say while deindustrialization was a topic from the 80s probably to the mid-2010s, deindustrialization has not stopped, but has been gone at a much slower pace, and there are actually indications that certain parts of the production sector are returning to the city, as we called it, or actually growing faster in cities than they are in other areas. The last 2 points actually come from the case studies. If you are going to foster the development of production in urban spaces, my pre-speakers both come from cities. They have talked about the competition for land in those areas. It's quite obvious it's going to need some kind of a support. The economic interests are often tilted in another directions. And the last part I will not talk too much about, but once in the project and we dug more deeply into the industrial structures, trying to uncover knowledge flows between industries. So which industries are linked through knowledge flows? And we drew sort of network diagrams of each of the cities. And if you look at the book, you will see that each city looks different in some way. So it's very clear that you cannot sort of, not one size fits for all. Yeah, that's an absolutely clear message from the policy side. Just talk a little bit about before I go into details, the disadvantage of this method of presentation is that the presentation is over, but the presenter has the feeling that for some reason the audience does not believe him. So I want to give you a few more slides with data. And before that, talk a little bit about the data we used. So we are basically using any data we can get our hands on in that project. Yeah, so we use a DACO database on NUTS 3 level. We use typologies developed by Eurostat to define metro regions. We use Eurostat a structural business survey to get a clearer disaggregated view of the industrial structure of the cities. We use the European Labour Force Survey to observe a little bit the structure within, the occupational structure within the production sector. You will not all jobs in production are actually producing. Some of them are service jobs and things. And we had local data from the case study cities. What are we talking about? Again, we have various definitions of or comparison groups. The one we use throughout is what we call the 58 first-tier cities, and this is basically the metro regions that are associated with that. So for most of my presentation, I'll be talking about that. What is, and this is the really hot question, what is production? And more from a point of, well, since statistics provides us only certain information than from a real content point, these were the sectors we decided for. So it's transport, logistics, wholesale. There's a component of utilities in there, so all these things. Just give you a few facts about what is production and what is production doing. So around 60% of all business R&D in Europe comes from the production sector, and in cities it's even more. It's somewhere around 70–80%. So you can immediately see that the production sector in itself is actually also a very important part of the R&D system, and that is urban. I don't think there's a way to argue that R&D is not a central urban function. Also, the production sector is something like a productivity machine. I'll show you a slide on that just a little bit later. Also, so I mean, it's the export base, but rather than talking about export bases, it is also the platform along which many services are transported that are not transportable per se, but actually the physical product is then the export of the product system. Just let me show you two slides. This shows you the productivity and wage development in the production sector. The upper lines are the production sector. The lower lines are the other sectors. What you see is that production has grown. The productivity in production has grown much more rapidly than in other sectors. That's okay. But what I find much more interesting is productivity has also grown much more rapidly in cities than in other areas in the production sector. So the production sector is a rapidly growing area. Also, I can't see my own numbers, so I have to switch the mode a little bit. One thing that I think goes unskipped, yes, we have seen the industrialization for the greatest part of the 1980s to 2010, but still metro regions do account for a sizable share of the production sector in the European context. So they account for about 30% of the GVA, 25%, a quarter. Only these first metros. If you're willing to take a little bit wider view of metro regions, you're easily over a half. Talk a little bit about the development of the production sector in cities. So I already said, after substantial decline, we see a change in patterns in the 2000s. There has been a clear downward trend in employment. We also see that the same does not apply for GVA. So, and the bulk of the decline is actually due to a improvement or an upgrading of industry. So this just shows you the development of industry or of the production over time. And the parts I want you to focus on are in the top panel. You see this leveling off of the decline in share in industry. You also see that in levels we are still growing. Using employment data and GVA data, you can decompose the component, what explains the growth of production in cities, or the GVA growth. Yeah? And so you have components that are related to productivity growth, to real deindustrialization, in the sense that cities are growing more slowly also in GVA. And you have the metro region as a whole, and a factor that comes to the country level. What I want to point out is that in the majority of cases, it's the productivity growth that explains the slower GVA growth over the period since 1980. So actually what we have seen is not so much a loss of importance in terms of what we are producing. It's just we've become ever so much more productive. And that is what the story is behind this upgrading story. So certain sectors are growing faster in cities. Of course, many of these sectors, utilities, logistics, are related to basically population growing. You need to service the population. There are other sectors which are also clear. This is the high-tech and high-skilled manufacturing branches. Clearly, there are locational advantages in cities for everything that's research close and knowledge intensive. The last one was the one where we were a little bit surprised, because we are also seeing this in a number of consumption close industries, beverages, furniture. We suspect that behind that there is a tendency for customized production, small-scale production, in returning to the cities. And then outside these sectors, there is, of course, a functional specialization within production, which basically says in cities we see even production in cities is often related to service jobs. Yeah, you work in a production sector, in a production company, but you're working in service jobs. Just to drive this home a little bit, in this graph you see all dots below the line are parts of the production sector that are growing slower in cities than they are in Europe-wide. The interesting ones are those above, and those are the ones that are labeled. Those are growing faster in cities. And just point out a few things. Manufacture of wood, manufacture of leather, are clearly industries we would put into this customized production part. We have, of course, also certain services that are related. Waste collection would be one that is clearly related just to servicing the growing population. Also, quickly show you the share of skill distribution within industry. So you see also that within the agglomeration areas of the EU or the cities, you have a substantially higher share of high-skilled occupations in there, and you're moving more and more into the higher levels. So this brings it together. I don't know, I think I still have 1 minute for the case studies. As I said, in the case studies, we then took this one level further, and we used methodologies to try to find the cognitive distance between industries. And once you look at that, and I advise you maybe to look at the book or the study, you will see how different each of, so we have Stuttgart and Turin. That was the example that was most thrilling to me. You look at two industries where you say automobiles, full stop, it's automobiles. And then you look at the network of production that sits behind that, and you see, you see very big things in the Stuttgart area, basically because it's driven by one big company. And you see a completely different structure of the network that is supporting this industrial production in the Turin area. And I think that this is an important stylized fact to keep in mind for policymakers, that their cities are sort of historically grown systems, historically grown systems, and that you need to address with industrial policies, you need to address these systems in their concrete context. I think I'll finish here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think you clarified very interesting elements, and I think many of our stakeholders, cities, were very happy about this picture of the situation, because sometimes it's very complicated, in particular if you are working in a planning department, to have a dialogue with the economic department and try to understand what is happening and how what is happening should be considered in the policy agenda. So I hope even in discussion we will have some opportunity to go through this data and maybe to go deeper in that. Now I'll try to catch up because we are a bit late, and I wouldn't like to stress too much the time for the discussion. And I would like to introduce the last part of the book, which is dedicated to policy advice. So the big question mark is, what can policymakers do in order to react to this situation and play a role in all this changing world where the productive city seems to be still very a crucial issue or dilemma. And what we did was basically to mix some inspirational cases we learned from and to build on them in order to formulate some policy advice. So the last part of the book is based on the one hand what we discover studying European cities and metropolitan areas, what they are already doing, because there are many cities that are already active in this direction, so it's not a completely new thing. There are cities that have been working on that. And on the other side, we try to generalize in order to fix some crucial elements for a new policy agenda at local level, but maybe also at European Union level. So we found out through these inspirational cases that there are 4 families of things, more or less 5, that cities are doing. On the one hand, they are trying to develop the knowledge side of the problem. So they are supporting studies that are trying to understand what is happening in their local context and how this is part of a wider picture. On the other side, there are cities that are already working on visions for the future that are trying to address this issue. Thirdly, there is some role for spatial planning. Maybe we are not aware of that. Maybe it's not that clear how spatial plans can deal with this topic, but there are cities that are using spatial plans or trying to use spatial planning in order to address this new policy issue. Of course, there are tools, very interesting tools, fiscal tools, incentives, agencies that are used to help spatial planning do what it cannot do, is not able to do. And there are a number of very interesting initiatives that we have discovered. And finally, there is some space also for reflection in terms of design, architecture design and urban design, because we know from the past that have the productive city in the city is also a problem of quality of urban context. And we are in a very sophisticated post-industrial context today, and this is a very good example. So learning from these inspirational stories that are diffused Europe-wide, of course they are around 30 cases, if I'm not wrong, so they do not cover what is there at European level. We try to fix some ideas and formulate an agenda of suggestion that could be used by other cities and metropolitan areas in Europe. The recommendation, the policy advice is divided in 4 families. that reflect this different dimension that I've just introduced. The first is about knowledge co-production. We have learned from cases that some cities are doing big efforts, and we consider that these efforts are crucial. And metropolitan areas can play a very important role in order to produce a picture of a portrait of what is happening, not just at the city level, but at the metropolitan level and the regional level, in order to understand how to reconceptualize this productive city concept. I'm sorry you cannot read through these lines, but bear on me, trust me. The idea is that there are at least 3 different dimensions that the cities and metropolitan areas can contribute to generate new portraits of what is happening. Not alone, it's not just the expert point of view that can contribute. There is a wide and important role that stakeholders, the economic actors can play. So the co-production of knowledge, so not just studies from outside, but talking and speaking and interacting with the local economic actors seems to be a very crucial element. So being in touch with the economic sector in order to understand how it is changing and what are the requirements, let's say, what they need and what they are doing already to change and what they would need from the public sector to help finding some space for the productive activities. And so, for example, we went in depth into some case studies. The Salzburg data collection is a very interesting case of a new portrait of the economic and the productive sector in the city of Salzburg. There are great examples of the work done by the Greater Manchester area to understand how Manchester is still a very productive city, and so on and so forth. You will find also the efforts from Brussels and the Circular Economy Plan to try to map how the circular economy is reshaping the productive city. Second element, spatial foresight, fostering new spatial conditions for the dialogue between the industry and the city. At core city level and at metropolitan level, there are very interesting examples dealing with generating visions for the future. So the case of Berlin, Urban Development Plan, Economy 2030, provides example of this effort to look into the future and differentiate the economy and find space for the productive activities. But there are also less, let's say, traditional or mainstream experiences like the Ile-de-Nantes experience, where non-permanent activities are allowed to reshape this vision for the future of the city in the productive sector. So you will find very different cases. Some are quite well known, some are less well known, and I invite you to go through these cases to explore, for example, the Streep-Eindhoven case, which is very well known, but also these less well known examples. Of course, there is a huge focus on the role of metropolitan authorities or metropolitan governance. What we found out is that there is space and need for metropolitan leadership. Metropolitan authorities have no power and competencies sometimes to really act and to play a very substantive role, but they can coordinate and they can help a lot municipalities in order to do this kind of job. So we try to understand what kind of guide they can provide for this transition, and we mapped very different cases and also different direction. On the one hand, the forum where you meet different stakeholders and you try to think about the future together with them. And this is the case of these Stuttgart experiences. But sometimes some metropolitan authorities and metropolitan governance frameworks can also introduce some space of action for coming back of the productive city in the city locally. So this is the case of the Lavazza headquarters. It's a coffee manufacturing that is now back in the city of Turin, while it had decided some time ago to leave the city. And it's not just a building, there is a long story of metropolitan leadership in this dialogue with this very important economic actor in the city of Turin. And finally, of course, collaboration is crucial, collaboration between different kind of stakeholders, the private and the public, the metropolitan and the municipal level. It's also collaboration between different sectors within the same institution. So the cases you will find and the policy advice you will find are about new forms of collaboration, for example, between the university and the local economic actors and the public actors. This is the case of an incubator in Turin. There are some new agencies, like in the Polish case that is mapped here. And of course, there are also very local experiences of collaboration, like in the case of the London's East Ends Trade Guild, where a local neighbor level, I would say, form of collaboration has been able to reshape the role of this neighbor in the productive city. So basically, through these cases, we try to distill some policy advice, and I really invite you to give a look at the book in order to discuss together and find out if this suggestion could fit for your cases, or if there is still space for other innovative solutions. Adrian is here. Okay, yes, maybe I'll just add some elements about what Adrian Vickery-Hill, a researcher from Osmos Network, a very important pillar of our research, would have been here to illustrate. Basically, we worked a lot with our stakeholder cities, trying to work on scenario making with workshops that were not just including the stakeholder people, the staff in the city administration, but also, as I was anticipating, some local actors. And these workshops were very crucial for us to understand the situation, but also reflect on alternatives, dilemmas. What is the role of the public sector? Should we go for concentrated scenarios or diffuse scenarios about the productive cities? And so alternatives. There are big alternatives, huge alternatives, and we in the book we try also to briefly explain how this scenario making exercise can take place in each city in a different way, but it's a crucial pillar because the degree of uncertainty of our times is so huge that probably if we need to find good solutions for the short term and the longer term, we really need not to be alone. And this scenario making exercise, I think it was really important in order to go in that direction and understand the role of the city, the role of the functional urban area, the metropolitan frameworks available or not in the different metro regions we worked with in relation to the different dimensions of the industry and productivity in today's metropolitan areas. So, this said, I think we have now found a way to have at least 15 minutes discussion, and I hope it was not too quick from my side, but maybe we can go back to some details. But I really wanted to open the discussion and invite our colleague, Alexander Wandt from TU Delft, to start this debate. And we have been inviting him very shortly, but so he is really engaged because it was quite complicated to find people happy to, not happy, available for this, happy, they were all happy, but they were all too busy. This means that everybody is busy in this issue, and so this is a good news. So there are not people just looking at what to do, but there are very busy people. So we really thank Alexander for accepting to being here. He said he already read the book, and he has very interesting comments to contribute to discussion. So Alexander, the floor is yours to start the discussion, and I would like to hear a bit your reaction to this presentation, and if you had the chance to go through the book, and then we will reopen the discussion and circulate. Okay.
Good. Thank you, Valeria, and the team for inviting me to be the first to give a reflection on the book. I'm not sure if you sold me very well in sense of being not busy, but I took the advantage of being close by, being located in Delft, and just a train trip a train trip away to come yesterday evening and leave again. Well, I'm Alex Wandel. I'm an associate professor and the head of the section of environmental technology and design at the Department of Urbanism at Delft University of Technology. And well, I start my reflection with a congratulations to the team. I think you really put together a rich, very timely, and a very insightful storyline. And I'll use the term storyline on purpose, because very often with these research reports you see bits and pieces that are not fitting together very well. Not the case here. And the storyline is so clear because, as we saw also from the presentations today, it starts from providing evidence, clear evidence that production is and will even most likely return to our cities and metropolitan regions. But it does so very clearly, saying that to what extent, which sectors, varies significantly from the specific context. And this is, I think, it's crucial. And the book reacts to that diversity and uncertainty that comes with that, with scenario explorations, with these 4 scenarios. And these 4 scenarios provide the possibility and exploration pathways for other cities, not only the partner cities, according to where they are in sense of their values, their aims, their ambitions, their specific planning cultures and planning capacities, as well as the specific production chains they are dealing with. And to have this flexibility or this way of exploring makes the findings very transferable. So that's absolutely well, an important achievement of the research. And finally, as we just now saw, it translates the findings in clear reassembling recommendations, which are really, really richly explored and accompanied with examples of good practices, but the practices also show the struggles the cities are dealing with. So it's not kind of only putting forward the positive sides. So that's also fine. So now, after this quick summary for our discussion, I would like to bring 3 points forward that are, of course, clearly biased with my own lens that I was looking at the book. I have a background. My research is about transition towards a circular economy. So I was happy that that came up today already more often, and there specifically about the spatial dimension of this transition. And what for me was interesting, and this way to think, is this is thinking and analyzing and planning and cooperating along value chains. I would even go one step further and think we should actually talk about value webs and not value chains, because it's much more complex as following one value chain. It's as we heard, it's specific. The value chain has specific local and regional conditions, specific actor networks, specific forms of potential synergies and conflicts. And if we take the circular economy transition serious, we have to include into this value webs, on the one hand, aspects of what we call nowadays waste management, and in the future we probably will call secondary raw material management or production. And if also, and this became more and more aware, of course, over the last month, if we take the geopolitical side of circularity serious, and our control over scarcity of materials, then urban mining and the mining of scarce materials and so on is also something that I think we should include. So then suddenly companies that do demolition, the construction, become actually production. And with thinking this, I think we have to, it goes to the next point. So we are, and I was really happy to see the Oslo map today. We have to think, we have to go back, well, we have to consider the scale of planning. So the metropolitan scale that is advocated here is for sure a crucial one, but I think these networks are going very often beyond. And that also asks probably for more, I'm not sure if I should call it relational or network planning approach that are not necessarily confined to places, but rather looks at specific locations, their stakeholder, and the infrastructures and structures that connect them. Which brings me to the point 2 that I want to bring up for the discussions. It's something comes from the spatial foresight recommendations, and you wrote, industrial intensification and mixed use areas may seem like a good idea on paper, but if poorly designed, they can cause serious tensions between future users and usage. Good architecture and urban design can find possibilities and support. Completely agree, but if we are looking at this next scale and next dimension, we should add regional design to it. I think that is crucial, because we are talking about structures, infrastructures, green spaces, canals, mining areas that are under pressure from several levels: climate adaptation, housing growth, and so forth. So I think it's important to not stick to the design on the small scale and not see the regional planning and design as an addition of area development, but really think about structures, structural plans, structural concepts. An example of just recently, Amsterdam published their comprehensive. It's called now comprehensive. I'm trying to translate comprehensive environmental strategy and vision. Just 2 months ago, and I think it's a nice example to see how our city made this step back to becoming a bit more daring in planning and designing and defining spatial paths. And then finally, I think, well, it leads, as you also advocate in the book, to new forms of collaboration. And there the question is, how are we making sure that we are not running into the same situation or error that we did with the energy transition? That actually the technology is ready, we know how to do things, but we are not getting things on the ground because we are not including people in the planning process. So it's really an advocation for multi-scalar, and that is the difficulty, multi-scalar collaborative and co-design approaches. There are methods and techniques out there that combine digital with physical means of participatory planning and design, which focus more on the finding the common and not so much the opposition, because I think that the democratization of these design processes is crucial. So in this sense, my last words, thank you very much. I enjoyed reading it, so looking forward to hear also the opinion of the others to the points I raised here.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And we have 10 minutes, more or less. So I would like first, if you want to react to these arguments and comments, and then open also to the public for some comments or questions as we prefer. So if you think you want to add on that, no immediate reaction. Mikael, do you want to immediately react?
I'm happy to give the space to others. Yeah, I've said enough.
maybe just to add, yeah. I mean, the issues you are addressing are, and I don't want to talk too long on that, but they're key. They're absolutely key. I'm just not sure whether I have all the good answers to that, or yeah.
So from my side, while I expect you to break the ice, I would just react saying that, for example, the second point is key to me. The regional dimension of design is a missing point, probably, in many of our local agendas. It's more easy to think about intensification, for example, in London. We studied that case. So thinking about how a neighborhood can be intensified and rethinking the mix of uses. But I am convinced that we are still lacking some design ideas at the regional scale. And this is a huge problem. It's not just for the productive city, it's for many other cases. I raised the issue also yesterday in the final discussion. I think this is an open and very important question that also relates to the cooperation, collaboration and co-design, because if it's very complicated to be participative at the local scale, but it's even more complicated, far more complicated to be collaborative at the regional scale, because inputs can be very complicated, the actors are multiplied and diversified, so it's even more fragmented, the situation, but it's even more amusing and challenging for planners, I would say, and also for policymakers. I don't know if it's amusing, but challenging. So maybe we can open to questions and comments also from the public, if there are any. Yes. Thank you very much for your help. And if you want also to present yourself so that we are a larger community and we know each other, thanks.
I'm Cristina Vasilescu from the Institute for Social Research in Milan. I have one common question on the last point you raised, the collaborative design. And I'm wondering how much are we building in the capacities within the administrations to do the collaborative design? Because in my experience, I was involved in the participatory budgeting in Milan and other participatory projects. We have a lot of outsourcing consultants doing the participatory processes on behalf of the administrations, but I'm not sure how much are we training the administrations themselves to be collaborative within their own administration, with the other institutions, and afterwards with the public. So I don't know if this is a more Italian context, or if it is the same, you have better examples, or how you manage to do it in the Netherlands. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to react?
Yes, if it's fine. Thank you. No, you're absolutely right. And it was kind of point 4 or 5 that I would have raised with longer time, because the capacity building within the not only the planning institutions but beyond the planning institutions is crucial, because it's widely not there. What helps very often is if they're asked to make comprehensive plans and strategies, because then there is a certain force of needing to work together, and then it needs an investment on human capital, if we want to say so, and that's an example. If you're looking for examples, and then I have to mention Amsterdam again. Apologies for that. Because they developed over the last years the circular economy strategy and vision strategy and implementation plan, which then fed into the comprehensive spatial plan. But it was a huge process, and it was also in collaboration with external offices, so with hiring expertise, and the city of Amsterdam is also in the Netherlands an expectation. I have worked with many cities around the world, but it's a planning department that is excellent. They do their own research, so it's a lot of people. So that, but that may be the form of collaborating, introducing metropolitan offices that organize this collaboration may be important. Chambers of commerce play a big role in this. If I look back at how the circularity planning started in Amsterdam, then it actually started from pushing from the companies that told the city, well, we want to move there, we need the conditions. So, not a real answer, but...
Any other comment? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Teofil, working for ESPON GTC. So first, thank you very much. I really appreciate this workshop. I had two questions. First, it's about the share, the importance of this productivity in the city. If you have observed during your analysis difference between eastern part and western part of Europe, if the size matter for a city, if it's a large or small city, and also location if matters, if it's close or not to a transport hub or to a seaside. And second, what role for EU policies? If the EU really support this or not, if there is a place to improve this and to support better the cities in that direction.
Peter.
I can go in a little bit into that. The sample, one city which struck us was Warsaw. So in general, what we find is, of course, that cities that are in the states that joined after 2004 are less strongly deindustrialized. That just has to do with the fact that there were other forces at work prior to 1990. The sample then on networks is very thin, but what I found was very striking is that the one city we have in the sample, which is Warsaw, has, it's a lot of relative large industries, but the connections seem to be missing. Yeah? So the connections are, maybe it's to somewhere else in the country, but it is not the typical thing of a close-bound network. Now, you know, from one observations to extrapolate to the universe of all cities in the new member states would be extreme, but it seems logical that that could be a story. Clearly, there are differences between size. Clearly, there are differences between functions. Capital functions are different. That's even more important if you have capital city functions. By definition, a whole sector is much larger, public services is much larger. So that's clear. There was another element to your question which I skipped now. Location. The proximity to hubs. Yeah, I'm not so sure. We didn't look at that in detail. Most of the cities that are capital cities, so they are in some way gateway cities anyway that we are looking at. There is a clear differentiation between, I mean, if you look at Stuttgart and Turin, they are clearly different from Vienna and Oslo as capital cities.
Can I maybe talk about the second questions you raised about what could Europe or European policies do? I think this topic, it looks now, if you see it in the book, like kind of an obvious thing that everybody should be talking about anyway, but I think we don't. In Vienna, this is a very kind of specialized topic that is not really in the mainstream. Maybe other cities are more advanced, but I think this initiative that's also in the new Leipzig Charta, which raises the topic of the productive city and how to kind of operate. I think it's good that it's in there, but I think that there could be many more initiatives on research or on funding or on just other like kind of top-down elements that it be included in the work and in the research of the European Union, because I think many cities don't really look at this topic enough, or with enough of a focus on this. And yeah, it could be almost dangerous not to do this. So I think it's just that the awareness and building is really important, and keep the discussion about this going. So I would really see the necessity to strengthen this agenda.
Yes, if I may add on this, I think the productive city is one of the pillars of this Leipzig Charter, but maybe through COVID, this has been a bit downgraded in the priorities. I mean, for the Italian point of view, for example, the resilience and recovery plan is much about digitalization of the industry, and this collaborates more with the dematerialization, apparently, of the industry in the city. While indeed we saw there is much materiality and speciality in this digitalization. So cities are there, they have to provide places for logistic, which is digital, but at the same time very physical. And this is just a stupid and silly example, but there is much more about the productivity that is digital, but at the same time very physical and concrete in the production of space and in the production of the city. So maybe after this phase in which we are all in an emergency situation and we are trying to think about the future, this Leipzig Charter could expect to give some more real elements and tools, or also incentives, or yes, tools, I would say, instruments to understand better what cities can do and what role they should play in this direction. So we are still waiting for a dialogue or a debate on that, and probably, and we would have been very happy to stimulate this debate through this book, and to reach also the writers of the Leipzig Charter to a certain extent to fit this debate. So we hope this will reach also this very high expectation. Any other comments or yes? I think we have how much time, Andrea? A few more minutes, and then maybe we have coffee, and so we can work on our coffee need. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. My name is Anneloes van Noort. I'm the EMC member for Flanders, Belgium. First of all, of course, I want to thank you for the very nice presentation, and again reminding us of the importance of industry and productivity in our cities. I would like to pick up some things I think almost all the speakers spoke about. The competition for land use. Because of course, productivity and industry in our cities is not the only important thing. And if I talk to the cities in my region, they tell me, well, we have to take into account so many different demands. I mean, for housing, Flanders is still a growing region, more people, so we need more houses. Of course, we want to combat climate change, so we need to find some space for renewable energy, but we also need to find space for climate adaptation, so blue and green infrastructure. We need to find space for services for all those new people in our cities. We need to find a space for the productivity, for the industry. I can go on with a lot of examples. And on top of that, in Flanders, we would like to have no more net land take, so no more green fields. So, yeah, and it's soon going to be European as well. So I was wondering, these cities, they are a bit overwhelmed, and they're not all like Amsterdam, with having a big department with a lot of smart people being able to work on that. So I was wondering, could you offer some guidance to these cities? Like, okay, you have all these different demands. How can you weigh them against each other, and how do you make the choices, the very difficult choices? Okay, which are we going to prioritize? How can we maybe also introduce some more multifunctionality, which is, of course, like we discussed already, sometimes quite difficult with productivity in cities as well. So does your book also offer some guidance on that, and could you elaborate a little bit more? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. That, of course, is very, let's say, mirroring our work, I would say. The book is an handbook, even if the definition of an handbook today would be quite controversial, and I don't think it's a real handbook. It's more a policy recommendation style. So the idea is exactly, on the one hand, sharing the idea that productivity matters. And so it's not just one of the losing competitive functions for land use. So it's still a core. And it should be regarded as a crucial issue, not just something that we want to get rid of. So rethinking the role of productivity in the city is the main argument of the book, and should be speaking to everyday practitioners in the policy, urban policy and regional policy field. So this is the main aim of the handbook. Secondly, through the last chapters, you will find examples, stories that produce some policy advice in the direction you are asking. So we try to exemplify and take as a lesson to be learned and to be used the fact that you can think of productivity in a different way. So not necessarily divided from the city, for example, the core or the other polarities and centralities in the regional dimension, for example. So the book tries to exactly go in that direction. Maybe there are no, list of actions and list of solutions, but we have used inspirational cases, not to say these are best practices, but it takes a long process to go in the same direction, but you have some good cases that explain how to go through these dilemmas and how to generate processes able to deal with this complicated issue. So I hope you will find some good examples of that kind.
I just can give you two kind of strategies that we have in Vienna are using. The one is densification. I mean, the most industrial functions are not very dense in building. I mean, the land use isn't very kind of we didn't try to save land, but much of the land is used not as dense as it could be. So I think the densification, we should support that. And of course, we also aim for the mix of uses. So to have not only this exclusive industrial land, but to bring other uses on top or next to or in connection to the industrial land, so that we don't want to reserve it only for one purpose, but we want to kind of layer uses on top of each other. Of course, this is, as was said before, is a very difficult task, but I think if we try to do it and if we find solutions for this, it can be done, and it doesn't always mean expanding the land use, but getting better at doing it. So that's what we hope to achieve.
Perhaps just to add that, and actually add an example from Vienna, is finding local synergies with production. I'm always using the Wefer, the Manner production site in Vienna, which is in a 19th century dense block area, which is a production site of sweets, of wafers, which has the production not vertical, horizontal, no, vertical. So the production on different layers, and with the heat, with the excess heat of the production, heats buildings around it. So it's this smart combination of uses. So it's densifying and diversifying, and that of course goes only for certain things. We will have also more dirty things coming back to Europe in sense of parts of production, I assume, in the next decades. And there I think important is to anticipate what will be the future brownfields. And don't wait until the brownfields become brownfields and then another 20 years, but think in a dynamic strategy with the landowners, with the production side also going on. One example is, for example, we're having so many regional airports in Europe. Nobody knows what their future will be in 10, 15 years, right? So this kind of things. And other things is that, well, we're still having many monofunctional areas, and specifically the suburban areas are there, and well, Flanders is a big suburb, right? Sorry for, but in sense of the structure, so there are really potentials for densification and diversification, specifically related with certain infrastructures that are already there. Also, there Flanders is an example, and there are still train lines that are not used anymore, and so forth. So there is the reuse of also physical infrastructure is for sure an important strategy there.
Thank you. I think it was a really nice debate at the end of this session, and I really want to thank the public and participants, and also our speakers today and my colleagues during these 2 years, Andrea also for organizing this session very well, and providing us the opportunity to share the results of our research and our open questions. So thanks again to ESPON for this opportunity.